right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, the Real Clear Politics average has Joe Biden up 8.7 percentage points on average over the last 3 weeks nationally, and in every single battleground state. And yesterday, we featured this map on the show. It shows that the upper bound of what is electorally possible for Biden in November is a massive electoral landslide. None of this is a guarantee, as we learned in 2016. But what does it mean is that we have to start taking very seriously what it actually means for Joe Biden to become president of the United States and commander-in-chief. This is especially relevant after the most recent deep state plot to derail Afghan peace negotiations and the bipartisan push to keep thousands of troops in Afghanistan for no reason. Our friends over at the American Prospect gave us a distressing look into what exactly we're dealing with here on the national security front if Biden ever ascends to the Oval Office, and just how deep the swamp will extend inside. The Prospect details how two close Biden associates, Anthony Blinken and Michelle Flournoy, decided to start a boutique consulting firm for defense contractors and Fortune 100 companies after they unexpectedly found themselves without a job in Hillary Clinton's administration. Blinken and Flournoy's practice entails helping tech companies try to get Pentagon contracts, helping defense contractors get more contracts, and basically advertising itself as a one-stop consulting shop for any massive corporation that wants help influencing the national security or diplomatic swamp. Now, in a particularly galling section of their website, the pair literally advertise that they can help major companies, quote, develop a strategy for expanding market access in China. Blinken and Flournoy are not going to be low-level aides in a Biden administration. Flournoy was well known in Washington to be the next Secretary of Defense in waiting under a Hillary Clinton administration. I personally attended an event with her and Biden in 2016, in which Biden jokingly called her Madam Secretary, and in which she jokingly referred to Biden as Mr. President. Blinken, on the other hand, was Deputy National Security Advisor under Obama and a Deputy Secretary of State. In a recent Biden campaign event, he was introduced as, quote, Senior Foreign Policy Advisor. And the rest of Biden's foreign policy team is exactly the same as the prospect lists, including Nicholas Burns of the Cohen Group, Kurt Campbell of the Asia Group, Tom Donilon of BlackRock Investment Institute, Wendy Sherman of the Albright Stonebridge Group, and former Hillary advisor Jake Sherman of Macro Advisory Partners. You beginning to sense a theme here? Former very high-ranking national security officials now working as outright consultants for financiers and Chinese companies and defense contracts, or companies who take those people on as clients. Does any of this bother Joe Biden? Well, when the prospect asked his campaign for comment, this is what they had to say, quote, there's a difference between consulting and lobbying, and that here's a pretty strong line there. So presumably, we don't have to have a ban on people who were consultants at one time or another, since I am one myself. It is just too good to be true. What's disgusting about this is the pure nakedness of it all. Michelle Flournoy, as they point out, literally serves on the Presidential Intelligence Advisory, on the CIA Director's External Advisory Board, on the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board. She has access to very classified and important information. Who knows what she is and isn't using to influence her advice to the most powerful corporations in the world? Under Biden, this is only going to ramp up. A member of the firm that Flournoy and Blinken founded even admitted to the prospect that Biden would be great for business, saying, quote, think about it. If Biden were to win, we do think that companies will start coming to West Exec for, hey, what is the Commerce Secretary thinking? The clear picture we're getting here of Biden and his team is that they're not rigidly ideological. If they were outright neocons, in a way, I would respect it more. But worse, they are transactional neoliberals who will tell you with a straight face that they believe in making the country a better place while enriching themselves off perpetuating the status quo. They can't afford to get out of Afghanistan because it would hurt their clients. They can't afford to pull back from Europe because it would hurt their ability to consult companies who want to do business with NATO. The grifting list is on and on and on. And the wholesale ownership of Biden's foreign policy team by this system and his inability to push back against it is a signature of some very troubled times to come in the next 4 years if he ever ascends to the presidency. And Crystal, I mean, I don't know if you read this piece, but it is stunning because it's not just Blinken and Flournoy, as he points out. Every single person works for some consultancy group. And then not even that, It's the naked lack of reporting. Why does this have to come from a progressive left outlet? Shouldn't the New York Times be investigating? I mean, this is Manafort Stone level stuff, right?
Yeah.
They don't care because it's just normal. It's like the normal grift of Washington that everybody's just like, oh yeah, she made a couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there, going to be the next defense secretary. Who knows how many contracts are going to steer their way to somebody's friend? It's all good, just normal.
No, they're like the fish swimming in the ocean. They can't see the water. This is just like the way things are done in D.C. Exactly. I mean, it reminds me a lot of, when we were talking about Hunter Biden serving on Ukraine.
People were like, whatever.
We asked Congressman Ted Lieu, he's like, people serve on boards. They make money. But that doesn't, the fact that it's normal doesn't mean it's okay. That actually makes it so much worse. And I really encourage people to go read this piece. It's such an important look inside the way that policy is actually made and the human beings who are at the table and the interests sometimes that are secret, by the way. They're not upfront about
they don't have to disclose
by the way, I'm also working with Northrop Grumman, just so you know. So when I'm advocating for this missile system that they happen to make, you might want to know that piece of information. I mean, that is literally laid out in this piece, and it is completely common operating procedure in this town. So on the one hand, it's just like it's so normal that they don't even think to report on it and look into who the individuals are, who they represent, how that might influence their policy. And on the other hand, the other piece of this is so much of our political coverage. I touched on this yesterday when we were talking about Susan Rice's potential VP or any of the other potential VP picks. It's all just treated as horse race and personality driven and demographic driven, what boxes do they check, rather than actually digging into the substance and the policy and what that might mean for an administration, especially when you do have someone like Joe Biden. That's the other piece that's interesting here, is they talk about the way that he's approached foreign policy. It sounds actually a lot like Trump, where it's very personality driven. He has this glad-handing approach. He believes in these personal relationships, many of which have gotten him into a lot of trouble in terms of his decision-making, trusting people and leaders that he really shouldn't trust. And
one of the best parts of the piece is about, I forgot actually this because this is my background. He was the guy who backed Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq, who is the person who started a sectarian civil war, gave rise to ISIS, and ruined the country after we left it in 2011.
And it was all just because he thought he was like his bud.
Yeah, and it was like Biden walked into Iraq thinking he was dealing with two Delaware political bosses. It's like, it turns out the Sunni-Shia conflict is a lot more complicated. And then maybe we should apply a little bit more intellectual rigor there. That is actually the piece that worries the most, because you can see it right now on Afghanistan. Because Biden and his team are like, oh, Trump wants to get out of Afghanistan, they're going to abandon. Biden has a record of pushing restraint in Afghanistan. His entire record was saying, hey, don't do this. Let's do the counterterrorism thing. Even in 2006, 2007, he was writing op-eds against the surge. He actually has a long history of being anti-intervention whenever that was the politically convenient kind of contrarian thing to do. But this goes to show, with Susan Rice doing the Afghanistan thing, and I played his comments here over last week where he's talking about dereliction of duty for Trump and all of that, about how we have to stand up to the Russians. That's when you really knew. This is a truly transactional, non-ideological figure who will go wherever the winds blow. That is a disaster. That is how you got Libya. Libya was the politically convenient thing to do. How did it work out for everybody? Maybe it would have been better to have somebody saying, hey, nobody talks about that one.
Well, and here's the thing, too, exactly like what you're saying. When you have someone who doesn't have a fixed ideology that they're committed to or an agenda overseas that they're committed to, then the people that you're talking about here, Blinken and Flournoy and all the rest, they're the ones that fill in the gaps. They're the ones that actually drive the policy. They're the ones that set the range of options that are available. So just like we've seen with Trump, where he's like, I want to get out of Afghanistan. That's just not even an option that's put on the table.
They're like, your options are you can increase by 5,000, 10,000, or 75,000. He's like, but I want to get out. I don't understand. That's how they get you. That's what they do every single time.
And it's not just, and some of these people are ideological, and then some of them just have, personal, professional, and monetary, direct monetary interests in serving this particular role. Because look, if they go in the administration, they'll cut all the ties, specifically those industries. They've got all those connections. Still, they know where their bread's going to be buttered after they exit the administration. So don't think that just because they technically cut ties at that point means that they have really like independence of thought.
It doesn't even matter. They admit it. They're off, basically on background to this Prospect reporter being like, yeah, you know, Biden being the president, that'd be great for us, because
great for business.
People will call for us and be like, what does the former West Egg partner, who's now the Commerce Secretary, think about X? That is worth billions to companies, right? If they're like, hey, we need to know which way the administration is probably going to swing on the new Chinese tariffs, that is literally worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Same on the defense secretary. If they're going to, on Yemen, that was the example that was given there, whenever she was talking about how Michelle Flournoy was advocating, I think, more Patriot missiles for Saudi Arabia.
Right.
She failed to disclose, well, not disclose, nobody knows, she won't even admit which defense contractor she works for, and wouldn't deny that Raytheon, who manufactures these Patriot missiles, was one of her companies. The only thing they would say is, quote, one of the defense primes, which is one of the 5 largest defense contractors.
Yeah, and they said, like,
it's one of their contractors.
It's in the ballpark. No,
right.
If you really want to understand why we have the foreign policy that we have, why we keep getting into these conflicts overseas that we can, once we get in, that you can never ever get yourself out of, this piece really lays out like the nitty gritty of how that works. And look, it is the norm. Basically, almost without exception, with a few outlier exceptions, almost anyone who ended up in the presidency, these are the type of people who would come into the administration.
It's bipartisan. That's actually the worst part.
And it's bipartisan. I mean, the same ideology, the same monetary interest pervades both parties. We saw it with the Afghanistan piece that we covered yesterday. The amount of support in Congress, bipartisan support, to prevent the president from drawing down troops in Afghanistan, a place that we have been for years and years and years, and where American lives are still being put at risk. For what? For what? This piece really lays out like the internal details of how exactly that happens.
Highly recommend everybody read it, and I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.